The SEC rule on natural asset companies will cripple land use in America. The rule would allow the New York Stock Exchange to list natural asset companies as a new type of company for public investment. NACs. NACs exist to buy the ecosystem rights to private, federal, and state lands and to permanently lock them away from productive economic activity. A NAC purpose isn't profit but rather ecological services. Forests, farmland, parks, and land-enriched resources are intended targets for NACs. These new companies would use their investor funds to acquire the controlling rights to any enrolled lands and then forever prevent resource extraction, farming, and other critical economic activity. In other words, this rule would empower activists to undermine the market's ability to allocate capital and resources for the benefit of local communities and for society as a whole. The NAC mission to reduce human impact on as much land as possible comes at a significant societal and economic cost. NACs are intended to attract not just impact investors seeking to influence social behavior, but also adversarial countries like China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia that can use their massive sovereign wealth funds to take American lands out of useful production. What better way to squeeze America than permanently locking up natural resources without a fight? If the rule stands, productive farmland could disappear rapidly. Energy self-sufficiency would soon be lost forever, and one of America's greatest assets, her natural resources, would be diminished due to climate catastrophizing complicit politicians and Wall Street promoters. For example, the global food sector accounts for 25 to 35% of global emissions. Climate activists are demanding an 85% in land-based agricultural emissions by 2050. This means cutting red meat consumption by at least 50%. Meanwhile, the World Economic Forum convinced Sri Lanka to eliminate synthetic fertilizers in 2021 because they emit nitrous oxide. Predictably, rice production has fallen 40 to 50%, while the prices have skyrocketed 80%. The country went from being a self-sufficient food exporter to an economic catastrophe. Our largest banks have signed on to this agenda by agreeing to net zero emission targets. The proposed SEC rule would add the financial power of Wall Street to this misguided campaign. Rural America and our critical agricultural sector will need to stand up to the SEC's commandeering of financial markets for non-financial reasons. Shame on the New York Stock Exchange for pushing this idea, and shame on the SEC for providing an inappropriately brief 21-day comment period for such a drastic rule. And shame on us if we don't reject NACs as a dangerous and fraudulent contrivance that will cripple the security and prosperity of our country. If this rule is approved, it will allow investors such as BlackRock, Bill Gates, and possibly even China or other adversarial countries to hold the ecosystem rights to the land, water, air, and natural processes of the properties enrolled in NACs, including our national parks. It also conveys the management authority to the NAC for all of the assets enrolled. Use of these resources for economically beneficial purposes are strictly prohibited. This includes mining, oil, and gas development, or any other activity that can be arbitrarily defined as unsustainable. NACs are the way that elite investors plan to profit from the protected lands creation by Biden's 30-30 agenda. If the SEC finalizes this rule, NACs will harm America's national security with destabilizing our economy. For Headlines with a Voice, this has been the Lockhart Perspective.